Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Top Gun Maverick from 2022. This movie is not for me. I think I need to start it like that. This movie is not made for me. I actually quite like quite a lot of different military-oriented movies. I think there are some great stories to be told in the context of wartime, and war fighting is a major part of human history, and it is worthy of artistic documentation as much as any other genre. Some people balk at the entire war genre as being tasteless or something that shouldn't be put to screen, etc., etc. I don't particularly see it that way, as I think has been made obvious over the course just of this series alone. I say that because of what this movie actually turns out to basically be. Now, nobody, I think, will be particularly surprised for me to say that this is basically a propaganda film for the US military. That's not inherently a bad thing. Most military films in general, regardless of the country, tend to be some sort of propaganda film. All right, here's the thing. Here's what this movie is. This movie is the height of Tom Cruise's hubris. It is incredibly impressive, and it's trash. I'm just gonna roll with that. That's how I feel. I finished watching this 15 minutes ago, and it is 2 a.m. and I am tired, but this has filled me with a frustration that I need to get out of me before I can sleep. This movie is very bad. And it is so much less than the sum of its parts. In fact, it might be the least close to the sum of its parts, the most less than the sum of its parts movie that I have ever seen. Purely on the basis of what they actually managed to execute on film is incredibly impressive and kind of interesting, and it amounts to a very bad movie. Let me take a deep breath. I believe I've actually talked about the original Top Gun in the context of some other movie that I've talked about before. It might have been Red Dawn, might have been something else. The original Top Gun is a movie I've watched a couple of times, and realizing that I had watched it a couple of times as I was thinking about this movie kind of threw me for a loop, because I don't know why I have watched it multiple times. I don't think it's been at the behest of other people, and I don't think I would have done it myself. So why I've seen it multiple times, I don't know, because I don't think that the original Top Gun is a good movie. I think it's a pretty poor movie. It's pretty mediocre. It's just sort of, it's Cold War propaganda for the Navy. It's fine. It's whatever. It's not insulting. It's just not very compelling in a whole lot of ways. The problem is, this movie makes every single mistake and has every single flaw that movie had, but even more. And that is not a mistake, because this movie fundamentally apes almost everything that the original did, down to shots and scenes that are recreated and not recontextualized. And I say that specifically because mirroring the original film while recontextualizing the scenes into a new, modern, more meaningful, or entirely different reading of the scene could be a really interesting way to go with a sequel, especially a sequel that people don't expect. Well, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, that I think a lot of people didn't think really needed a sequel. And I say that because even Tom Cruise said that this movie shouldn't have gotten a sequel. Not recently, but at some point in the past, he had said it multiple times. So the fact that it got a sequel and it did the original movie again and it made all the same mistakes again has my hackles raised. Uh, okay. Taking another breath. All right. Let's talk about the casting and production first, because at the end of this video, I'm going to tear into it, and at some point, I'm just going to have to cut myself off because I can't take it anymore. The production of this film is incredibly impressive. I think it goes without saying, or probably everybody knows at this point, that Tom Cruise has a great love for doing all of his own stunts and everything as practical as possible. And to that point, he flew his own plane, and there was some flying of own planes, and there was some backseat riding of real planes, but this was all done, as far as I know, almost universally. It was done in the real planes, and they went every extra mile after extra mile to put cinema cameras into real planes in order to make this all happen. Apparently, it was an incredibly grueling process for all of the actors as they went through some real flight training, and obviously not what's seen on screen is not entirely practical. A lot of it is they didn't actually do all of the stunts as shown, but a lot of it was done as practically as possible. In addition, the coordination with the Navy and whatever other groups were involved in this is obviously a feat of its own. Hollywood working with the military is not unheard of, but purely on the bureaucratic and clearance side of things, getting to work with the actual military to make these things as accurate as possible, and to use their equipment and to pay them for all of this stuff is kind of a feat of its own. We could get into figuring out whether I'm just going to wipe from my mind the practicality of, despite the fact that the movie company probably did pay them for all of the flight time and all that technically this is probably very substantially taxpayer funded. I'm just going to wipe that from my head before it makes me mad. Okay. Sorry. I was trying to talk about the things that are good about this movie. The casting and acting is pretty good. Totally serviceable, in some cases delivered really well, not with a lot of subtlety, but I chalk that up to mostly an unsubtle script more than anything else, and some fairly one-dimensional characters who don't have a lot of growth or much of an arc. That said, I can't get around this. I've talked before about how much I dislike Miles Teller and how I think he's a bad actor and I think he's a bad person. But ultimately, casting him as Goose's son is a brilliant piece of casting, because damn, he definitely looks like Goose's son. Like, I don't know what it is, but it works just right. Unfortunately, he's also got that Miles Teller scowl through the entire fucking thing, which at sometimes is appropriate and sometimes is not. So his performance is still like the least of the bunch, but casting wise, I think it was a good visual casting. That's the best I can give it. The rest of the casting I think is pretty good. Everybody who was cast in their various roles, I think, carries the type of role that they were supposed to be pretty well. The characters, like I said, are particularly unsubtle and somewhat tropified, not necessarily in a cinematic sense, but in terms of a very generic version of this kind of guy from the military and that kind of guy from the military, etc., etc. In some cases, that's particularly glaring, if only because, as accurate as it still might be, having characters who are who you can look at and go, oh, that's just so and so from the original movie, but younger and put in the current era. It's it, it's just, I don't know. Like, it's also worth noting that there is a little bit more diversity in the cast, but I can't give that a huge amount of credit. Um, I can't discredit it either. It's just not. It's kind of a nothing, and most of the diversity in the cast is still hidden behind the leads, who are all white and male. Um, so, getting back to the production that I was talking about, the soundtrack, oh man, I'm not complimenting it. The soundtrack is a whole bunch of throwback music and a whole bunch of other modern pop songs mostly, and then a bunch of like unremarkable symphonic stuff that serves the scenes well enough, but is like kind of paints it in a certain way of this like swelling music to be like, you love your military characters, right? You're really rooting for them, and it's very in the genre. It does not do anything to unseat its reputation for being just, a very pro military propaganda thing. Sorry, I'm getting caught up thinking about all these different things that tie together in the film that upset me, and I'm trying not to go there just yet. Ah, okay. The practical stuff, like I said, working with the military on this, obviously, having all the direction from actual military people means that I can't give a plus or minus particularly for the costuming and stuff like that. I have to imagine that, as detailed as those things are and were, it's not like particularly worth writing home about. It's just kind of what, I don't know. It's kind of nothing. Visually, the cinematography is neutral to kind of bad. The beginning of the film in particular feels very much like it is trying to ape the cinematic stylings of the original without doing it even as well as the original did. I think it is a modernization of a style that was already sort of like a cinematography style that was already sort of unremarkable at the time that the movie came out, and is made worse by the addition of even more aggressive color grading and filtering and all these other things that are used to sort of make you make things reminiscent and make you nostalgic for that older film. And while there are little things that I think it does well in terms of like sound effects and a few other things that are mixed effectively to, especially the in cockpit scenes, to give you a good idea of the both the diegetic noise and the senses of the forces being exerted on the pilots and so on. I think that's done pretty well. There's a few other little things that I think are done pretty well, but like are so small in the grand scheme of things that they're kind of not that special. Is there anything else I want to talk about before I tear into this piece of junk? I'm really not being neutral on this at all. I'm sorry. It should be so much better, and it has so many opportunities, and it doesn't go for any of them. I think I'm pretty good. okay, I'm going to go ahead and just let myself, I'm not going to try and, you know what? No, there's nothing to spoil here. It's basically the same movie. The whole plot is Tom Cruise is a crazy pilot and he gets a bunch of other pilots to rally around him, and they go on a crazy mission. Doesn't make any sense and has hijinks, and at the end, it's mostly okay. That's that's like the whole summary of the film. The problem is everything in between. Where do I even start? The plot is stupid. I'll be totally honest. I can't remember the plot of the original Top Gun that clearly, and that I think is for a good reason. I did not go check, but my memory of the original Top Gun is they are very non-specific about the adversary and the mission, and they do that on purpose because it is a military propaganda film, and also because they're trying not to piss off any real-world adversaries that the United States has. So they dance around it, and they say, oh, it's whatever. It's no particular country. It's just, some mission we gotta go do. And this movie does the exact same thing. It says, oh, it's a rogue state. In fact, it not only do they do what might be the lesser of two evils or might be the greater of two evils, which is they say almost nothing about the setting of the mission that they are intending to go on. They don't place it any particular place in the world. They don't say who the adversary is. They barely give any details about the actual target they're supposed to strike, other than saying it's nuclear, which is just yet another boogeyman in the military handbook of everybody hates nuclear because people hate nukes because nukes are threatening, which is fair, but also not as common as anyway. So they don't talk about the adversary. They don't give you a good sense of what they're really up against. They pitch you this scenario that has enough detail to give you the idea of the threat, but not any detail if you're actually interested in the stakes of the event. This is not a stealth operation. They don't have to do this because if they do it wrong, somebody's going to find out, and the U.S. will get into bigger trouble. This isn't like a particular group that with a particular MO. It's just like bad guys making nukes. We don't want them to do that, so we got to do this crazy thing. So now we're going to talk about the crazy thing they want to do. And I'm looking at the time code of this video already and worried that I'm going to turn this into another 40 or 50 minute video, which is exactly what I didn't want to do. But you know what? Fuck it. I'm not going to be able to sleep without it. So we're just going to go as long as this takes. All right. Here's the stupid scenario. Somewhere there is, near a coast, there is a big mountain with a big crater or dip in the middle of it or something. And in the middle of that mountain, that definitely isn't an evil lair that could only be, that makes no sense geologically and could only be created in the mind of somebody trying to write up an evil lair. At the bottom of it, there is a bunker. Not a building, a bunker. It's sunk beneath the surface. So, and the only way to, and leading up to that is a big open space and a canyon. It's definitely not Star Wars. Don't think about it. Don't think about the fact that it's just the Star Wars trench run again, because it's stupid. So the scenario they've pitched is they can't take a strike at it because leading up to it, there are surface-to-air missiles. This whole mountain's bristling with them, etc., etc. They can't fly over a certain level, or the radar will pick them up and they'll be shot down immediately. Okay, where do we start with how stupid this is? Nobody builds this facility. It wouldn't happen. Nobody builds an evil lair. Nobody builds into a mountain unless they have a really good reason to, because it's a huge pain in the ass. And they definitely don't build it into a mountain in a remote place unless they're doing, well, okay. There are, obviously, in the US, we have our own mountains full of nuclear bullshit, but that's a different kind of thing. It is structurally completely different. It's buried into the side of these things because, they needed to go do nuclear testing somewhere where nobody was. But it's not the secret refinery for the nukes. It's a whole thing. And it's in this mountain, but also canyon, but also it's very close to the sea, which I can't for the life of me figure out how geologically this place exists in the first place, let alone why anybody would build something there. But we're just going to pass over that and say, sure, this stupid place exists, and it is a threat to the U.S. and to the world, because the U.S. is the world's police. That's a whole other discussion. So we have to go strike this nuclear facility of some kind, but we have to do it in like a couple of weeks because apparently that's when the nuclear material is getting delivered, and they want to do it before there'd be a huge nuclear fallout from it. Okay, fair enough. Listen, I know that the military in particular, and the government entities in general tend to run on extremely delayed timelines because bureaucracy is a bitch, and everybody gets everything late because nobody can do anything efficiently. Fair enough. But hey, we only just discovered this giant bunker in the middle of a mountain and an entire mountainside bristling with dozens, if not hundreds, of SAM sites. No. If this was being built, the U.S. military would know about it. I promise you. I am not an expert on the military by any account. But even what has been declassified and what we knew of the U.S. military decades ago and their capabilities, if this is a rogue state if this is a rogue state, they're being surveilled heavily all the time. They are also, anybody who's doing any sort of significant construction in that rogue state is being surveilled even heavier. And if they're starting to put up military stuff, it's being surveyed even heavier, and probably going to be sabotaged long before the facility is ever completed, if this is actually a concern. But for some reason, there is magically this place that sprouted up out of nowhere and needs to be destroyed in 4 weeks. Fuck it. Sure. We'll just write that off completely. Now let's talk about their game plan. Their stupid-ass game plan is to run the Death Star trench run again. Except for it's even stupider because they have to run the entire trench, then they have to climb a mountain at a very severe angle, dip down into that mountain, and then dip back out of that mountain. So they're pulling a ton of G's, going up, down, and up again, to the point of complete and utter absurdity. And that is their plan, and they need to do it in an incredibly short amount of time because there's also magically an entire Air Force base there that is got planes that are gonna come shoot them down as well. Which I should mention, they kind of bury the lead on that one, because they say, at the beginning of the movie, they say, a bunch of planes are going to come scramble and shoot you down as soon as you drop your bombs. So like, you got to do this really, really fast. And then at the actual event, spoiler, they say, the whole plan all along was actually to bomb the runway so that they couldn't get any planes off the ground. That was totally our plan the entire time. And we're also expecting no planes to be in the air. because why would there be? We haven't given them any reason to be worried. Whether or not it actually goes that way, I won't tell you. I'll leave some things in case you actually want to. Maybe I won't. Who knows? I won't tell you unless I feel like telling you. How about that? So this is incredibly stupid and incredibly difficult, and they've made it the hardest thing possible. It's also absolutely not how the military would ever do this. Again, I'm not a. I'm playing armchair general here, or armchair admiral, let's say. And I am not. I've never been in the military, and I am not pretending to be a military expert by any means. However, knowing some of the resources that are available to the military and the disclosed technologies that are public record, and the typical doctrine of the US military, especially over the last 20 years, this is not how this would go. The reality is that especially because this is an isolated location and everybody in the area is considered to be an enemy combatant, and they make no mention to the contrary in the film. They're not saying, "Oh, there's a town next door, and we don't want to blow that up." The answer to this conundrum is a B-2 at very high altitude, a stealth bomber, if you're not familiar, a B-2 with a very large bunker buster penetrator, and it's just gonna cruise along at like 70,000 feet and drop it, and then that bunker is probably gonna be gone. And if it isn't, then they're gonna drop a couple more of them. That's really what's going to happen. Alternatively, here's a bunch of other ideas. Blow up all the SAM sites. They are not protected in any way. The Tomahawk missiles they used to blow up the runway could also have been used to blow up the SAM sites or any number of other weapons. They also probably, because they are parking an aircraft carrier off the coast, and somehow nobody's noticing, by the way, this rogue state doesn't notice they've parked an aircraft carrier, which I should also note is not being does not have any other ships with it, which is not Navy doctrine at all. Like, that's not how that would go. You don't just send an aircraft carrier and nobody else. That's stupid. Like, and everybody knows that's stupid. If they are bringing the Navy, and also if we're just going to assume that for some reason these enemies do not notice that the Navy is there, then they are also going to bring a whole bunch of other ships. They're probably going to bring some of the biggest ships in the fleet, including a whole bunch of missile destroyers, and we don't really have battleships anymore, but various other things that have the capability to either do missile bombardment or direct bombardment. And when you have that capability and you're on the coast already, like even back in like World War I and World War II, the ships that they had in those eras were doing bombardment of dozens, if not hundreds of miles with conventional weapons, not missiles. So the idea that they wouldn't just light the fuck up, that light that whole place the fuck up, is hilarious. There are so many ways they could have eliminated the other threats on this mountain and then eliminated the mountain, and instead they decide to fly the planes to the canyon. So now let's talk about the planes. The planes they are flying are F-18s. These are not particularly old planes, but they are not particularly new. They even allude to the fact this is so stupid. And for anybody who knows anything about plane technology, it doesn't make any sense. They use F-18s. They mention F-35s, which are the most modern, to general knowledge, planes in the U.S. military, and are still a largely classified plane. People have silhouettes, and that's most of it. That's most of what people know about them. They are stealth fighter bombers, and are one of the few planes that's actually considered to be a fifth generation aircraft. Getting into the details of what constitutes fourth and fifth generation aircraft is not a topic for this film or for this video, but I guess I'm going to have to talk about it anyway because we got another problem here. So the reason they're not using F-35s or its little baby brother, the F-22, which is basically just a downsized F-35 that's been declassified and sold to other countries as well, is because the military is not going to let them. I believe that because this is also the Navy, not the Air Force, the Air Force has F-22s. I believe the Navy only has F-35s. And because it's a classified plane, of course, it's not going to be in a film. And of course, they're not going to have practical access to it. So they used F-18s, which have been around for quite a while and are a previous generation, a fourth generation plane. The problem is their reasoning for this in the movie is that they say that the whole mountain is GPS jammed. I don't know what that means. I don't think anybody knows what that means because it doesn't mean anything. It pretends like the F-18 is not GPS guided, or that the armaments that are on the F-18 are not GPS guided, or that they can't put anything but GPS guided armaments on a newer plane. Now, the only reason this matters is because the crux of the issue is that they are flying inferior planes to their enemies. Now, I'm going to try not to dig into all of the known development of military planes both in the U.S. and its opposing forces, but generally speaking, the only forces. No, I'm not even going to talk about specifics. Generally speaking, it is pretty well considered by the international community that the US's F-35 is the only true fifth generation fighter with really no peers. There are some other states that claim to have built fifth generation fighters, and in practicality seem to not be, to basically just be fourth generation stuff with extra bells and whistles for the most part. Basically not pure aircraft. This is only relevant because they talk about how this enemy force has fifth generation fighters and they are superior to the F-18 with the fourth generation. And if the second they are caught, they will lose in the dogfight because it's a whole other kind of air fighting doctrine. That is correct. Generally speaking, there are historically a lot of differences over time between different forces and their air fighting doctrines and the planes that they built and used against each other. And I think we could get into a whole bunch of historical scenarios, but I'm going out on a tangent right now. Here's the problem. I know I keep saying that. This rogue state can't possibly have fifth generation fighters. And even if they did, that doesn't inherently make them win or lose a particular conflict, because differences in design philosophy and air fighting tactics mean it's apples and oranges. This comes into play in the dogfighting they actually do, which is very silly because in the cherry on top of this whole argument, the actual dogfighting as it comes out, even though they've spent the entire movie talking about how they are flying inferior planes, at the end of the movie, all of the dogfighting is like, oh, I guess they're slightly better. They seem to get like a target lock a little faster, but besides that, they're looking pretty similar in their capabilities. There is one particular thing that is kind of interesting that they bothered to actually be kind of accurate about, which is that certain type of flying wing aircraft have the ability to do certain maneuvers that older aircraft don't, because they can sort of do these tumbling maneuvers that can't with the sheer forces. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's stupid. It's so stupid. This movie makes me angry. So we're 36 minutes into this video, and I haven't talked about the thing that bothers me even more than all of this stupid, inaccurate military stuff, which, I don't think it's unfair to say that if you're really into this movie, or thought you were going to be really into this movie, that you probably hold a relatively, pro-military stance, and, enjoy the kind of films that come out of military-supported cinema. That's not a judgment. That's just like, that is probably the target audience and the majority of the people who would see something like this. So for all of the military knowledge that those people have, which is probably more than me, the problems here should be obvious, technically. But what bothers me even more than all the military problems is that the story problems that the first movie did are the story problems here as well. In the first movie, we have a cocky Air Force pilot who is humbled by the death of his wingman and has his ego tamped down by that and a variety of other events that remind him that he is human and he cares about human things, and that he is a mortal being and not an immortal warfighter, plane flyer, badass, cool guy. Ultimately, at the end of that movie, they say he is anyway, but at the beginning, they sort of stop and say, oh, remember how there's like humanity in you? That's really important. It's definitely not the whole point of the movie, but it's in there. So they take the same idea and they frame it exactly the same way in this movie, which is that Maverick is still haunted by the death of Goose and has spent the last 30 years continuing to be a loose cannon who isn't getting promoted and is being tossed around and is really only being saved by his old friend Iceman, who has been promoted all the way up to the Admiralty and continues to sort of, save him from his own mistakes. So, step one, you've undone the growth that happened for Maverick in the first movie. And it's now been 30 additional years, and he still hasn't particularly learned his lesson. Problem two, Maverick, still haunted by Goose's death, is now confronted by his son, who goes by call sign Rooster, who personally resents Maverick because he pulled his enlistment request and pushed his military career back. And the whole movie, that whole storyline hinges around the fact that, as we saw in the first, I think we saw in the first film, I think that happened in the first film, the Rooster's mom requested that Maverick not allow him to ever get into the military because of what happened to his dad. That basically, yes, the military is a dangerous career path, can be, and could lead to injury or death, and she doesn't want that to happen to her son because she also already lost her husband that way. So in the meantime, between the films, she's passed away, and Rooster resents Maverick for stopping him from getting into the military when he wanted to. And so there's this constant and very immature tension between the two of them because both of them are big manly men who can't talk anything out. There is one scene where Maverick talks to Penny, I think, who, as far as I can remember and what cursory Google tells me, is Penny was not actually a character in the original film. She is a fabrication for this one, and is just now a love interest. We're not going to get into... We'll get into that later. We will get into it. Where there is a brief, tender moment where he admits that, like, he doesn't know how to handle this because he's a immature little baby man who can't use his words or express his feelings. Sorry, now I'm just being judgmental. And so he says, well, here's the scenario. And she says, well, did you ever tell him? And he goes, ugh, and then continues to not tell him through the entire film. And that arc dead ends at, no, I didn't tell him, and I won't ever tell him. And in fact, the resolution of the film ends with him still not knowing that that's the case. And they pass it off like, oh, well, I don't want him to know that it was his mom actually who told me to do this. I want his memory of her. Anyway, it's also bullshit. So he's like, well, no, I gotta take it like a man. Let him hate me. Instead of, us both being adults. And so the actual conclusion / non-conclusion to that is, oh, well, we had a bonding moment during this mission and I showed that I trust you and therefore everything's cool because we're big manly men and we saved each other. And also when we saved each other, there was absolutely the most I don't know how to talk about this scene when they meet each other and they're like, you idiot. Oh no, you idiot. Also I'm glad you're alive. But I'm a man, so I can't show my emotion or tell you that I'm, physically or verbally or in any other way that, hey, I'm really happy. Just got to be stoic like a man. Like, I'm laughing because it's so absurd, but this is also like genuinely how a lot of people behave. Okay, I'm getting heated again, and this video is already way too fucking long. Where was I? So there's no conclusion to that arc. No meaningful conclusion and no meaningful growth. Rooster doesn't know. Maverick doesn't say. They never have the very obvious and easy father, son and father moment. Let's call it son and father because it's not actually, but the guy who could have been a representative of a father figure at some point in his life. There's no true reconciliation. There is no unpacking of their feelings or the events that actually transpired or their personal motivations. There is no learning from each other. It's just, at the end, we did a military and now we're buds, because this is still a Cold War film at heart. We're cool guys who do military stuff together and don't talk about our feelings. So there's that. that very clear, important growth arc for both of them that should have happened, but didn't. There's also the fact that this movie is called Top Gun Maverick, which is when they put a substantial, not insubstantial focus, I should say, on Rooster as a character, yet it's very clear that the main character of this entire film, his name is in the title, is Maverick. And despite the fact that Tom Cruise will probably, almost assuredly, definitely shouldn't make another one of these Top Gun films, there is no passing of the baton. There is no continuation here. No, this was a Tom Cruise film, not a Tom Cruise and Friends film, or even a everybody else film, and also Tom Cruise is there because he's the link between the two stories. No, Tom Cruise is the main character, to the point that at the very beginning of the film, when they're like, "Oh, we don't want you to fly this mission," well, no surprise, at the end of the film, he's fucking flying the mission because he's Tom Cruise and he's a cool guy and he really likes being a cool guy and he can never not be a cool guy. He even has his running scene in a in a film about being in the Navy and flying planes. He has his running scene because he's fucking Tom Cruise, because this movie is absurd. Okay. Taking another deep breath. I promise we're coming to a close at some point here. You know when it ends before I do. There are also a bunch of other emotional side stories that should be important but are symbolic only, such as his relationship with Penny, who it's implied is sort of an on-again, off-again attraction, but he's moving around, and they it either did work out at some point or didn't work out, or who really knows. But it's Tom Cruise, and he's the cool action guy, and even though he's got to be in his 60s at this point, or very close to them, we're gonna have the like romantic interest, and even down to the incredibly cliche like woman invites man in for the happy times, because finally she sees him the way that he wants to be seen, so that he's validated in this very, very wannabe masculine film. Suddenly she has approved of his decisions, and therefore he gets to sleep with the girl, because that's how movies work. I guess it's the 1980s again. Meanwhile, it's these two middle-aged people, which I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with having middle-aged people having romantic or even sexual encounters in a movie. And in fact, there are multiple different movies on this playlist where that is a thing and is totally fine. But in this particular case, it's like, oh my god, guys, you guys are shooting this like you're 20-year-olds. Like, oh, you finally got the girl. This isn't, a mature relationship. This is still you being like weird, horny teenagers about this for reasons I can't understand. Meanwhile, there's not actually any emotional development. Possibly the only emotionally mature person in that entire arc is the like teenage / almost adult daughter, who's like, "Hey, could you not break my mom's heart?" Which is incredibly cliche, but also the most mature take anybody has. And then there's like all the other relationships that are incredibly cliche and not resolved. There is the relationship between Maverick and Iceman, and then that does not come to a really meaningful conclusion. In fact, Iceman could basically not be in the film and almost nothing would change. They have a heart-to-heart that isn't a heart-to-heart. That's all I'm going to say. There is the relationship between Maverick and all of the other people in the military structure, who are basically like, "You're a loose cannon, turning your badge and gun," or the equivalent for this. I'm obviously making a joke. Where he's constantly being chastised like he's a child. None of those none of those relationships ever resolve either, other than to be like, man, I guess he got it done, so I guess he's a cool guy, and everybody's gonna very literally clap and give him a hug. None of those relationships are ever picked apart. Also, just the whole thing about him mourning Goose, and continually being caught up in this idea of needing to protect Rooster and feel guilt for Goose is not resolved either. He never emotionally matures in any way. And while obviously this is a very sensitive thing to try and unpack, and obviously somebody who's been suffering from that trauma for that long is not going to make a turnaround in the course of a couple of weeks in a movie, but they never even really address it. It's only used as a plot point to drive the conflict of, well, actually, there's this conflict between Rooster and Maverick, but Maverick is haunted, but not in a way that we can pin down in specifics, other than also this movie uses extended flashbacks to original footage from the original movie that is so unsubtle. It's almost hilarious. It's not, there's so many different ways they could have shot those things so that, you know, you could have incorporated that without just literally showing a scene from the previous movie, especially when that scene is almost at times shot for shot a clone. It's so bad. It's so bad. And so you get all these shallow characters who promise to have development and then don't, and threats that make no sense, and rules of that govern how the scenario will be addressed that make no sense, and people who at any point could have somebody there's enough characters in here that somebody should have matured at some point and gone, oh hey, if I change this thing, this whole scenario can go better. But no, this is all extremely concocted for the sake of the narrative that they wanted to tell, except that the narrative is also not about having any character growth. It's about high five, we did a military and we did it real good because we're the best of the best. I'll be honest, this movie is probably not as insulting as I find it, but it's just sort of infuriating for me personally. It's kind of fine. Don't let me stop you from watching it, I guess. This movie's so fucking dumb. Makes me mad. Oh, this video's too long. Alright, well, fuck it. I should probably go to bed at some point. Thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your irate host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time. God.